Hey everyone, it's Daniel here with this week's episode of Founders Live. And I'm super excited to have my friend Rachel, co-founder and co-CEO of SNOWE, joining me today. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you? Thanks for having me. It's been a while.
It's been a while. I missed having our dinners together. As I was researching, I totally didn't realize the stuff that you used to do with your own place in New York when you were getting the business launched. So when we can do that again, maybe we'll do a dinner in the SNOWE studio, and then everyone can buy everything we serve it on afterwards.
That's exactly how it used to work. It honestly seems like a distant memory. We used to have so many dinner parties at the place, different parties for work and things. So looking forward to hopefully getting back to normal and being able to do those things again soon.
Yeah, no, I feel the same way. Well, it sounds like New York's opening up. Toronto eventually will let us leave and cross borders soon, and so I honestly can't wait. But really, I'm just super excited to chat with you. And as I mentioned in some of the emails before this, we really have a great audience of founders who tune into the show, and really excited to just hear a bit of your story. So I'd love to start. Really at the very beginning of what life was like growing up, and how that eventually led you to doing what you're doing today. But what city did you grow up in, and let's start from there.
So very beginning. Okay. So I grew up in New York. I grew up as part of New York City, but right outside in the suburbs. And life for me, I was very lucky. My parents were they're actually both educators, now retired, but so that gives you a little basis of we weren't allowed to skip school. My sister and I, studies were taken very seriously, but I think to their credit, they also didn't put a lot of pressure on us, which was really nice. And it was more of a guided to let us learn to love going to school and doing things and being a part of things. So I very much give them credit for that. What else can I tell you about growing up?
Well, I'm almost very curious, like if you give my own history, like I didn't really ever start businesses. I didn't really have a side hustle, but there was those like little things of like the first thing I think I ever made money on was selling my Game Boy and then flipping it and turning it into like a summer hustling memory cards on eBay for like
wow.
A month. And that was and a month as a kid is a long time, so that felt like a whole era of my life. And I'm just always curious to understand, were there threads of, did you ever try to start a lemonade stand? Was this something that you had done early on in life, or really when you got to Wharton and the story we'll get into, when looking back, just reflecting now, were there any signals of like, what, at some point I'm going to actually start a business versus just, do kind of work a job like most other people do?
Yeah, no, I think not until I got into the workforce and started working and started really exploring, or more than anything, eliminating what I was realizing I didn't want to do or thought I wanted to do, and then how that evolved. But if I think back to my childhood, a lot of times entrepreneurs are stereotypically big risk takers, right? I was very much not that. I was a rule follower. I was more of a goody two shoes, as my sister used to make fun of me about, and definitely followed the rules, definitely like to color within the lines. And I think the older I got and the more comfortable I got breaking some rules and taking more risks wasn't until a little bit later in life. But to your point, I definitely didn't have a side hustle. I wasn't doing a lemonade stand. I wasn't doing anything like that. Like for me, it was more, I felt, and again, it wasn't from the pressure. My parents both happened to be teachers, but it wasn't from their own pressure. It was like, I wanted to, do really well in school. I always wanted to go to college. I thought I wanted to go to grad school, but I wasn't sure what. And, we could get into it in a couple of minutes, but I was actually deciding between getting my MBA and going to law school. And I think like that decision for me, law school would have been very much not the right decision. And, getting my MBA turned out to be exactly what I think I should have done, and what helped me understand more and more about how much I loved entrepreneurship and like how I was pulled in that direction. But I think it was more of a journey getting there. And it wasn't, one of those things where from a young age, anyone could have looked at me and said, she's definitely going to start her own business.
And when, whether it's when you were a kid or when you were considering going to college or applying to colleges, what do you remember what your vision was at the time of like what jobs attracted you? Like my dad always like, oh, you talk a lot, so you should be a lawyer. And like my dad had no idea what law is. He's like, I see lawyers on TV, they talk a lot, so you like to argue with me. So go become a lawyer.
Right. But that's like a lot of things. I think maybe nowadays kids are exposed to like more non-traditional careers, but I feel like still at the time it was very much like a lot of my friends were becoming doctors, lawyers, and like went into finance. And for me, I always really liked math, and I studied economics in college, and thought that meant that was, I mean, it was a great foundation for business in general and just really problem solving. But I thought I wanted to go into finance and ended up in real estate finance after college. And, for me, again, that kind of got to pulling me in the wrong direction in the sense of, but then I was able to learn, okay, this is what I don't want to do. These are the things that I don't enjoy. These are the things that maybe I'm not super passionate about. I think that's the key thing. It was like trying to figure out what was I passionate about. And that's what I always tell people when, they ask me about starting a business or anything like that. And, starting a business is awesome and rewarding and is one of the best journeys I've been on in life, but you have to be so passionate about what you're doing because it takes over everything. It takes over all your thoughts. You wake up thinking about it. You go to sleep thinking about it. Yeah. So you have to really be passionate about it. And I think for me, that's what I learned, that I was doing these other jobs that I just didn't have that passion about.
Yeah. I mean, we can get to that later as you start SNOWE, but I say this to all of my friends when you run a business, it's almost this, you have to, I guess, balance like the underlying, always there's excitement that gets you out of bed, because if you don't have that, guaranteed there's what I call this underlying or like gnawing stress. It's everyone in every job will have moments of like, oh my God, this is on fire. So it's not, to me, I say the peaks are not as impactful in your life as the literally every day you wake up of like, okay, if this doesn't work, then like, my team's relying on me, my livelihood's relying on this, like, and it's just this baseline of like, if everyone is at a 5 on stress, you're at like a 6 or 7 all the time. No matter if things are going well or not, it's just kind of like a baseline of like, oh my God, I have to always be on thinking about this stuff because buck stops with you, right?
Yeah, totally. And that's where, to your point, that passion comes in. I actually saw a video that someone posted on Instagram, I think last week, and it was another founder who I'm friends with, and it was basically like this old school locomotive, and the entrepreneur was on, I don't know if you've ever seen it, the entrepreneur was on the front, and he was like hanging off the front, and there were basically boulders that were getting like tossed out along the way, and he had to throw a boulder at it, and it looked like it could have been a video game. And he posted a day in the life of an entrepreneur, and I chuckled when I saw it because it's true. It's obviously metaphorically speaking, but there are just all these things that always pop up that you just can't anticipate. And you try as much as you can, but that's definitely why you have to like really love what you do, because that's where that stress comes in when things just kind of get thrown at you.
The payoff has to be worth it, not just the financial payoff, but the emotional payoff. Of
I'm willing to deal with
all this crap because I love it at the end of the day.
Absolutely, and you hit the nail on the head. It's the emotional payoff. It's not the financial payoff. I think that's where a lot of times people say they want it, you want to have that home run and you want it to be the next unicorn and all of these things. But if you were doing it for the financial payoff, then I think if you start that way, that's not going to set you up for success.
100%. I'd love to get to, the starting point of SNOWE, but, before we get there, you're at SL Green in finance. And was it at that point where you were deciding like to do law school after that, or? So what was the decision, walk me through what was going on in your head at that point of, Wharton MBA or MBA in general versus law school versus like, was there another option you were considering at the time?
I wasn't sure what exactly I wanted to do. I knew I didn't want to be totally in real estate finance, and what I was doing for SL Green also encompassed, it was basically like their version of WeWork that they had way before WeWork even existed. And it was more like this high-end, if you could, envision high-end version of it, less for entrepreneurs and creatives and more for like finance, hedge funds. And I started to learn that I liked what embodied the entrepreneurial spirit by basically, working on this business unit within SL Green and seeing everything from soup to nuts. So yes, dealing with all the financial projections and everything, but really how to operate a business, how to design and build out spaces. That's where I started to, really pique my interest for design. And it's ultimately a hospitality business as well, where, you're dealing with customers, you're dealing with every aspect of hospitality. And then it's an operating business on all of it. So really there was where it piqued my interest in running a business unit. And again, I knew I liked that side of it, and those things excited me, and doing different things, and not having tunnel vision and just sitting in spreadsheets all day and doing one thing. So that's where it started to pique my interest more and more. And as I was then eliminating or realizing certain things that I liked and didn't like, I wanted to go back to grad school because I wasn't quite sure exactly what that meant for me. What was that next step? It didn't crystallize. I could go into management consulting. That could be another launching point where you're exploring other things. But I also always wanted to go back to grad school. So that's where I was thinking about it. And again, thinking about things that people were passionate about. A lot of my friends had gone to law school directly out of undergrad. So this was already 4 years after undergrad. And they were already lawyers and practicing. And I could count 10 close lawyers that I knew, and maybe one liked what they were doing.
Yeah.
So if I was looking for what I was passionate about, I just started to, again, look at what's the day-to-day. And I didn't think that was it. And so the MBA was more of a broad exploration and launching pad. So that's why I decided to go back and get my MBA.
Very cool. And I mean, that's really the seeds of where SNOWE came to be. But before SNOWE, it looks like you launched something called, and you can correct my pronunciation, Hot Couture.
You got it right.
Yeah. So tell me more about that. How does that end up becoming a project or something you try to do at Wharton? It looks like around the same time.
Yeah, it was exactly that same time. So it came about when I was there with one of my close friends in business school. And again, that's where I was starting to realize, okay, all of these things were coming together for me. And I think, I want to find something I'm passionate about. I want to test the waters with launching a startup. And Wharton had a ton of programs and a lot of classes where you can kind of use that as a launching pad. So they had something called the Venture Initiation Program. And my close friend Nithya and I had come up with this idea because she was talking to me about, and Hot Couture was really selling high-end Indian formal wear at more accessible prices, but not just accessible in a price standpoint, but making it accessible in the US, because what we found out was people were still flying to India to get all of their outfits. And you were talking about, this wasn't that long ago. So there was still a ton of e-commerce. And in this day and age, that just seemed ludicrous. So we used one of our spring breaks, and we actually flew to India and started, we had done research in advance. We started looking into suppliers and really digging in. And the fundamentals of the business, I've still said this to people recently. My sister-in-law has brought this up actually. And, she said something like, I can't believe somebody still hasn't done this. And I was like, I still think it's a really good business. Nobody really has done it. Nobody has done it well. Nobody's built a brand around it. I think there's a real opportunity. But what we were able to do was leverage all of these programs, leverage our different professors. I think what really it ended up coming down to is we were working on this our second year at school, so really in detail, and it came down to graduation time, and we had to be at a point where, okay, are we going to do this full time? Or are we going to take other jobs? And this is where that passion came in. So for me, I really enjoyed it. I really love fashion. So that was appealing to me, but I wasn't so passionate. Like, it wasn't my burning desire to fix this problem. And it wasn't something, it was something I had tangentially experienced, but not something that I really felt the need that I was being pulled in the direction to do. So that was one of those things where it could be this clear, great business opportunity, but you really have to be passionate to take it to the next level. And at that time, we decided not to go full time, but we had done trunk shows in school. We had started developing all of these own, like our own brand. We were deciding, do we do it branded? Do we do a marketplace? So we were testing all of these things. So all of our classmates had come to like a bunch of trunk shows where, you know, when people were getting married, we used it as a great launching point that we would outfit everyone going to the wedding. So there were a lot of learnings where it ended up being super valuable to, of course, apply to SNOWE, as then Andres and I were getting started on SNOWE.
Yeah, so that's really your first business. You sold product, you had customers, you kind of did the end to end, which is pretty amazing.
We sure did. Yeah, we sure did, and all of it. Yeah. So it was a great foundation.
We have some support for Andy. Thank you. Exactly.
I know.
Exactly.
I know.
So you end up not pursuing the idea, and you end up at BGC. In my head, I'm always going to say BCG.
I know.
BGC
it's very
partners.
hard.
But you know, you had also at this point kind of had this experience and this taste of starting a company. What made you decide to take that job versus not to explore another idea? Like, what's the in-between period of finishing your MBA to actually launching SNOWE? What was those few months like?
Yeah. So that was where, you know, we had both, you know, decided to part ways, take jobs post school, but this was also, so everything was happening at the same time, where Andres and I, so for those people who don't know, that's my co-founder. We're also a couple. We had met in school, and we were setting up our own apartment in New York City. We both were moving to New York City together, and that was the first place we were setting up together. So while we had both taken other jobs at this point, and I decided not to pursue Couture, we started going through this process of setting up our own place. We, you know, were going to all of the stores and, you know, the big box retailers, call it the IKEAs of the world, where things were affordably priced, but much more ubiquitous in design and quality than we were looking for. So then we started looking into this more, and we both had an interest in design. And so just a side note, Andres, his background is also like more management consulting, and he'd done retail strategy and a whole bunch of things that were very helpful in getting SNOWE started, but not necessarily directly related. But he did grow up in a family of architects, interior designers, furniture designers. So there was that in his blood, I would say. So as we were really designing this first place, you know, we didn't want to settle, and we're like, this is our first place together. How do we make it, you know, a little bit nicer? And so we started looking, and then when we're going through that, and you graduate from the IKEAs of the world, and then at that time, also don't forget, the landscape of e-commerce was very different. It was like the proliferation of D2C was barely scratching the surface.
It's right around when Casper would be like gaining steam, and that's really the main iconic player in New York, right?
Exactly, and this is even before that, because I think they launched, if memory serves me, in 2015.
You're right.
So this was like 2013. You know, we graduated 2012, traveled a little bit, started jobs, you know, moved into a place end of 2012. So this was like beginning of 2013. So this was like, there was Warby Parker and Bonobos. So that's, if you really think about,
you can buy some clothes and glasses, and that's great. And that's about it.
Exactly. And then when you were looking at home, you know, when we were looking at home, it was so different. And I remember I had like, I don't even know, thousands of tabs open where I'm trying to find one single product. And, you know, there is still, home is such a massive industry, and there's so much out there, and there still was a ton at the time, But it almost felt like because there was so much out there and there wasn't anything that was well curated or well designed from our standpoint, that it felt like the paradox of choice. There was almost too much. So it felt like nothing. And then, we would go to the high-end retailers and things were beautiful. Obviously, you could walk into amazing boutiques in New York and, other high-end department stores, but they were astronomically priced and, not necessarily even at the time, because we were just setting up our place. Not everything SNOWE sold, but beyond that, furniture, everything. And, we could see a table that cost the same as a car. And we were like, this is insane.
Yeah. That's yeah. Sorry, to interrupt with it. What I find very fascinating, and this is kind of one of the, if I were to bucket, inspirations for businesses, this is in the vein of like, oh, I saw this problem and I just wanted to solve it for myself, and that was where the idea came from. But it's not like every day that someone's like, you know what, I can't find furniture for my house, so instead of just, I don't know, searching endlessly and settling, it's like, I'm just going to make my own furniture, my own brand. And then, you know what, I'm going to start a company with my partner and we're going to run it out of our house. And then you're both working very stressful jobs of just like, and you have your, I don't know how you kind of paid for your MBA, but you probably have that. Like, so let's stack all the difficult things together. And what's easier than furnishing my house is building a company to furnish my house. That seems logical. How does that, what was the first conversation like? Let me put it that way.
When you break it down that way, it seems a little crazy. But when you're in it, I guess, and this goes back to potentially the comment where it's like you have this aha moment, and we felt drawn and we felt pulled in that direction. And we felt like if somebody doesn't do this, like we are going to miss out on this massive opportunity. And I think that didn't happen overnight. It was definitely a process over, several weeks and months of searching for things. And as I had mentioned, Andres's, family had done like furniture design, and so we had some idea we could start, poking around supply chains and understand, okay, we might see this piece of furniture. How much does it really cost to make? What does that look like? So we started to do that research on the back end, where we're just like, is this crazy? Is this totally insane? Exactly what you're saying. So we can't find the furniture, so we don't settle for like paying $2,000 extra for a sofa that we didn't want and go on our merry way. But, the more and more we dug into it, the more and more we realized that we weren't only experiencing this, all of our peers were experiencing this. The more and more we started talking to people, like that's where I think it's like, we're like, not in a rush where we had to do it tomorrow, but we could do the proper research and we can say, okay, is this really a thing? And I think the more and more we dug into it, that's what we realized. And I think, the third part of that equation for us, where it wasn't just like, okay, luxury quality at a much more accessible price, in addition to this paradox of choice and needing to simplify the process. It was also, as we were just talking about, there were no brands out there, especially in home. Home was this totally antiquated industry where, physical magazines and publications were still a thing and very much a thing. And it would show these big sweeping shots of mansions and penthouse apartments, and not the way real people
just live. Like New York, right?
Just like New York, like not shoebox apartments that you were paying way too much for and nobody cared. And it was also all of these brands that, I think spoke to a different generation, and also home at the time especially tended to skew more feminine. It was very floral and feminine. There was no like gender neutral conversation, where I think design has shifted and that mentality has shifted and that conversation has shifted, and in a really great way. But there was none of that, and there was nothing, that appealed to us. So I think stacking all of those things, we were like, there's really this opportunity that, again, if we don't jump on this, somebody will. 100%. And I think the other layer to it was trying to figure out, where do we start? Because we could start with so many different things within the home industry, right? Like we didn't choose sofas, but there are other companies who chose sofas and have done it since. And We didn't choose furniture, and we chose what we called home essentials, but that for us were the non-furniture pieces that were basically foundational. And I usually use the parallel that it's the jeans and white t-shirt of the home. Mm-hmm. So it was those things that could be classic and timeless, year in and year out. So it wasn't fading with different trends. And then you can mix and match your own personal style on top of that. But it was also, sometimes if you invest a little bit more in it, you get and focus on the materials and the quality and the provenance, then it will last you as your design taste changes and you evolve and you change places and apartments and move and all of these transitions in life. It can kind of grow with you. So we started with bed linens, bath linens, and tabletop dinnerware, flatware, and glassware. So those were what we saw as the cornerstones of the home that were non-furniture.
And I'm curious if this was one input to one input into it, but I was listening to an interview, mutual friend Phil Toronto. I don't know if he's watching, but I was listening to the podcast he had done with Andres, I don't know, a couple of years ago, and he had mentioned, I guess, a business or a version of SNOWE called Decorum that you had actually started first. Tell me a bit more about that and how that kind of bridged. Why was that actually the first concept before you eventually got to SNOWE?
Yeah, so that's a good point, because as I'm glazing over it, that's an important part in the journey. But for us, that was really the test and how we were able to put something out, and I'll elaborate on what Decorum was. It was basically our test, or market research test, to be able to put something out into the world to understand how people responded to it and what we wanted to do and what we wanted to launch. And for Decorum, we were focusing a little bit more at first on the decorative accessories. So it was actually the opposite of the home essentials. It was what you layered on. And we were curating from different artisans around the world. So we had, as we were looking into this, part of the research that I was mentioning that we could do and have access to supply chains, it was we went to Bali, and not a bad place to need to go to do research. We're all right, research, let's go. So we went to Indonesia, we had gone to Peru, we went to a bunch of different places and started sourcing, and we got up a site and we basically tested it. We didn't do this big launch. We tested it with friends and family. We got a little bit of press. We got a mention in Elle Decor and things. So there was definitely, it was up for a total of about 6 months, the site, but it was something we were doing on the side, kind of as we were
both working full-time.
Exactly. And so we were, trying to narrow down exactly what we wanted to do. And I think what it really came down to and what it taught us, and there are a lot of businesses where you're able to do this lean startup mentality and just get a minimum viable product to market. And we are very much all about being scrappy. We still are. Our team is super scrappy. It's not a totally different approach, but I think, a lot of times a minimum viable product can work in something that's a SaaS product or tech related, where if you're trying to build a brand and there's these other intangibles around it and how customers respond to it, and, it's going to be this living, breathing thing, and what it is, you kind of have to get it out there for people to react and see what they'd shop, what they'd respond to. How does that on-site experience, and brand experience create this connection to the products? So there's a lot more intangibles. So that's why for us, it was important to get something out there. And we learned from that. And what we learned was trying to aggregate product that by nature isn't the same, because you're dealing with artisans, you're dealing with not standardized products, you're dealing with small batch production runs, is very, very complicated from a supply chain side, from an operational side, from getting something on site where you're photographing it, but it may be very different than what someone receives. So there were all of these things that we learned, and I think that was what was so valuable, because it allowed us to basically take that research and say, okay, so there's still something here. These are the challenges. This is how customers are responding here and there, but this is the real opportunity.
Well, it's kind of the same trend we've been talking about even in your career choices of like you learn what not to do, right? We're not going to do multi-brand. We're not going to do artisan. It's like
Yeah.
you're almost describing like I don't know if luxury is the right word, but it's like a curated Etsy to a certain extent, and like
Yeah.
Etsy's a completely different kind of business to run relative
Totally.
to what you're doing. What
Totally.
what was the because my question around when you mentioned the initial SKUs or products you launched were linens and tableware. But was there a particular data point from Decorum that said those are the SKUs to launch with, or how did you
Good
jump
question.
from Decorum to the initial set of products for Snow?
Yeah, that was a good question. It wasn't necessarily what we learned from Decorum, but then how we eliminated and narrowed down, okay, we want to start with home essentials. What does that mean? What are we going to call the cornerstones of the home? And we thought about like what those main pieces are, what those interaction points are in each room in the home. So for the bedroom is the bed as the focal point. For the bathroom, your linens. And then eat and drink was also a very important part for us as the brand, and also cornerstones of the home. If you think about, how you make memories, what you do, we were just talking about dinner party, right? So without focusing on the furniture, how do you create a tablescape that, totally changes things and elevates it? So that's where we started with dinnerware, flatware, and glassware. And that helped us narrow it down that way. But we also, like what you'll see on our site, we have many more variations and SKUs and things than when we first launched, because we launched with 4 categories and people thought we were crazy to launch with 4 categories even to begin with. Yeah. And again, in hindsight, maybe we were.
It's a lot of different things to manage. You also pick not only 4 different categories, but very different. Like making plates is different than making cutlery, is different than making towels. Like let's pick 4 different production methods. Glass, I think, was part of your launch. Like that's definitely not simple.
Exactly. So, I mean, to that point, that was a perfect segue, because what I was going to say was we also had to know, what we didn't know and what we didn't have an expertise in at the time. And, we, I think, had some naivete where we could say, sure, we should launch 4 categories because we want to change the way the experience is, and this is what we believe. And, if we think about the business fundamentals, these are all important things to us, but we needed to partner with someone who had the product expertise. And that wasn't it's something we've learned along the way, but again, we're still learning and it's still many categories. And so at the time we partnered with a couple of early team members. This was pre-launch, and one of them is our COO now, who's our head of product and operations, Erica Peppers, who had, spent her career in product development and product and merchandising, and was, the person that we could partner with to kind of help start to find, okay, who are the right suppliers in these categories, and how do we start to narrow things down, and how do we crystallize as we bring this strategy together what it's going to look like as we launch.
And when you decided on the SKUs, you found your supplier. I think the other complication here is it's not going to be one person that makes all these products. You need a couple of different producers. So very tactically, there's like MOQs and things like that you have to deal with. How do you actually pay for your first order? How did you finance the business to start?
So the actual first order, we had self-finance. So we self-financed. I mean, Decorum, we were saying we did like very small batch. So that was all we self-financed. And then the 1 or 2 of the initial production runs that we had to get in like 6-8 months before we wanted to launch, we had to pay up front. And we were like, because again, we basically had to pitch manufacturers like we had to pitch investors afterwards, where, they had to take a chance on us. There are MOQs, but there are a lot of challenges in these categories where your brand, it's all our designed product, it's all our branded products, and we're branding the flatware. Wow, yeah.
So there's dyes, there's all the stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, there's all of that. There's so
there's just savings
there's mold fees, there's all of that. So we we basically paid for some of the initial production, and then we raised a round of friends and family and like seed it was about 6 months before launch, because we were also then starting to build out the brand and doing the brand work, and that was also going to be expensive. So we were, that's where I said, like, the balance of how can you do things that are cost effective, but that you've also done enough research and analytics that you have an understanding of where you want to go, and then kind of take that leap of faith to put a bit of capital prior to launch. And that's kind of how we approached it.
And in that seed round, outside of, the friends and family people are just like betting on you, who was the first person that I guess, like, whether it's an angel or not, but I call like an institutional check, or like a person, who's the first person that put in money into the business that didn't know you before you like rolled up and said, hey, we're raising money for this business? Was it at that round or subsequent rounds?
So that round we strictly, and by round it was kind of spaced out by a matter of like 6 months, in the sense of I think, raised that friends and family round in January, and we launched in June, and we basically were, doing another part of the seed, another close of the seed, those 6-7 months later. So I don't remember. So the first ones were definitely, we stuck with friends and family, and I don't remember the exact order of operations. So like which institutional investor, like by the month or the week or what have you. But one of our first institutional investors was David Tisch and Adam Rothenberg at Box Group. And I remember, so they were probably one of our first pitches to a VC, and we had pitched them probably back in January or February, if I get that timeline around right. And, to their credit, they were like, and we were walking in at the time, we had samples of products. I felt we were like always rolling up with suitcases. We would be doing our pitches at coffee shops back in the day, and like,
can you just replace our tableware with ours?
Like the amount of times that we'd come into a coffee shop and be like, did we take all of the silverware? Was it ours? Was it theirs? And like taking the plates back, and you're just like showing samples of things. I used to call it like my Mary Poppins bag, because I'd just have this like tote, and then you'd be like pulling out product samples left and right, because we didn't even have a site at the time. We were working on the brand. We didn't have a site. We had these product prototypes. And so to David and Adam's credit, I think they were early believers in us and early believers in the brand, but they said, look, the big thing that you're betting on also is building a brand. So come back to us. Like, I see where you're going with the vision. I see the quality of the product. I believe in it, but come back to us when you've kind of built that brand. So we basically launched the site and went back to them with that. And then they were like, okay, we're in. So they were definitely one of the early ones who weren't just friends and family.
That's awesome. And I'm sure there are many moments, as any good entrepreneurs had, but so it doesn't have to be necessarily around launch time, but typically I think that's where the scariest moments are. Was there a moment, in and around, call it that first 6 months, where something happened, like whatever first comes to mind, you were like, wow, this was a terrible idea. Like, we're really screwed, or, oh my God, this whole thing is, gonna implode. Is there kind of a memorable moment or moments or like that?
There were so many. Like you said, you like really feel the highs, but you really feel the lows. But we were dealing with a lot of different producers, and I mean, it was a handful, but we had decided on the name SNOWE, and we were doing the brand and building the site and, building out our packaging. And our flatware was one of the first things that we had to go into production with. And you'll even, now that you'll go into large retailers, and not a lot of people brand flatware. It's just, but for us in building the brand, it was crucial that everything we did had the brand on it. And so we got back that initial production run, and I don't remember, I think it was like 1,200 sets of everything, which at the time seemed like
a lot.
That was a lot. I mean, and that was like the MOQ that we needed to hit. And the brand on the knife instead of saying SNOWE, it said SNOWE with an S. Like, you cannot make this up. You literally cannot make this up. And so we were like, what do we do?
You probably check like, each box of like, can't be all of them. Let's check another.
Can't be all of them. And so we were like, well, we can't set up the relationship where, even though they're like a super, like, they are one of the highest end, like, luxury flatware producers that we had to pitch. And somehow it made it through QC. And it's because it's so small and it's a dot, but we were like, we can't set up the relationship this way where they think we're going to accept this as quality. Yeah. So we had to reject it. But mind you, we had like no team. We had some interns. There was us. This is a couple of months pre-launch. Yeah. And we had to go through, it was myself, Andres, and Erica. And we had to go through all 1,200 sets and pull out every single knife, wrap it, and send it back to them so that they could basically fix it, because they had to polish it out, buff it out, do the whole process again, and rebrand it SNOWE. So if we've told this story to our team, and it's been like one of those things that, you know, it's a story I'll never forget. And it's like, we're like, we can't make it up, but our back was killing us by the end of the day. It was like, and you had to send it back by a certain time. So we couldn't, for them to then get the production back to us for launch. And, you know, for us, it was like our own pressure, but we had also taken friends and family money. So every day was like, you know, we didn't want to push out launch by 3 months. Yeah. So that was
one day you should launch like an iconic anniversary, and maybe it's 7 years now. In 3 years, do a 10th anniversry collection. It makes you luxurious. The SNOWE. the SNOWE collection. Oh my God, that's yeah. I'm just wondering too. Just like, did we not pay for a die line or something that says SNOWE? Like, how do you? But you only mess up the knives and nothing else. That's such a crazy, a crazy outcome.
It was such a crazy outcome, because the way, it was also just the knives, because the way you brand the knife is very different than the way you brand the other pieces of flatware. So that was also it, where it's etched on, and then the other, like the fork, that's actually like engraved into it. So yes, things you learn.
Yeah, amazing. Well, you have a fan, Andy. Thank you so much. They are real. Yeah,
they are real, and it's all the things that I guess don't get talked about often enough. But there's so many of those stories, and you know, then our team and early team members are all a part of it. I mean, I could go on. There was one Black Friday, Cyber Monday, where we had a leak in our warehouse. So Black Friday, can you imagine? And it was our first pop-up store. So I was in the retail store, and we got a call, as was, I think, Andres and Erica, and then the rest of our team, because it was our first Black Friday, and we were like, what happens? I mean, we're not like doing doorbusters, and we don't really go on sale in the same way, but like, we had no idea what to expect. And it was like 8 o'clock in the morning, and we got a call from someone in our operations team saying there are buckets coming down from the ceiling above in the warehouse.
Oh my God.
So it's always at the most opportune moment.
Yeah, when you most need it. As we're coming up on time, one thing I also wanted to touch on was kind of the initial growth, because this is still early days of, you know, performance marketing. Depending on when you got started, like Facebook was barely a thing in terms of now. Today it runs. Every business is basically, you don't have a retailer, you have Facebook, which is the equivalent of selling, you know, at wholesale in just a different way, right? But when you first went live, what were maybe in the first 12 months, what were some of the main drivers of the business? What did you use to drive sales? And you know, obviously that evolved to what we're all used to today.
Yeah. Right? Yeah, to your point, it's evolved. Like, the marketing stack looks very different than it does now. One thing we focused on earned media out of the gate as well. So as we were thinking about how do we build credibility as a brand, how do we get our name out there, and, you know, similar to reviews, have it come from a third-party credible source.
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't just ourselves that was saying, yes, you know, these bed linens have changed the way I slept, or, you know, I ate on this dinnerware and it totally elevated the experience. So we focused on PR and earned media, and what we did, because we didn't have a store when we were launching and we didn't have the capital to build out a store, we basically took over a loft in Chelsea, in New York City for 2 days. No. And we set it up for what we envisioned the SNOWE experience and SNOWE brand and SNOWE home to be. And then invited, I think it was like 100 different people from the press to kind of come throughout those 2 days. And we had, you know, a bartender doing different demonstrations for cocktails. We had a chef cooking up eggs. Again, things that were simple, everyday items, that how you would use the product, but just to really immerse them in the SNOWE experience. And so that was our first, you know, really retail experience that we set up that was out of the gate. And that was like 10 days before we launched the site. So that was early June of 2015. We're coming up on our 6th birthday now, in June, which is crazy. And I think for us, that really helped put us on the map. It helped really get the brand out there. I still feel at the time, and you know how PR is very different now with affiliate, and you know so many things have changed. Like we were saying, like the landscape is totally different, but at the time it really was, I think, the right move for us to help get our brand out there, help get our name out there, help get our early customers, and then we were able to kind of leverage that as a launching pad.
And other than the experiential, which sounds like that was kind of the initial hook to start the relationship with press and editorial, for founders that, you know, feel like that they could, you know, use earned media as a strategy, was there anything you learned on how to maintain those relationships where, you know, when you're new, you have this launch and people want to cover you, but then when you're no longer new, how did you sustain that as a repeatable strategy? What did you do to maintain those relationships?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. And I think it's obviously relationship based, but I think it's also how did we continue to evolve as a brand and evolve what we were doing that made it press-worthy? Like, what were stories that we could continue to tell about the brand? And I think we did, just as part of the natural evolution, there were things that, you know, sometimes didn't get picked up by press where we thought it was press-worthy, right? And then sometimes they did, and there were different things that just, as part of the journey that we took at SNOWE for a number of reasons. So you mentioned setting up a showroom where we were having dinner parties. That was also part of our home. That was our office for our team. We would do appointments for customers. So it wasn't street level in New York, but they would come shop the loft. And it was as if they were shopping the home, but then they found out that it really was our home. So they were shopping our home. And, you know, again, people thought we were crazy, but that, you know, at each point in time, we were doing it for different limitations. We were doing it because we wanted it to be a retail lab. We wanted to learn what we wanted to do at the street level. We, you know, thought about consolidating costs, having our office be there where it is. All of these things, like how could we set up product and set it up in context? So for future product development, what are customers latching on to? So all of these things that we really wanted to test and learn. But then press was like, wait a second, you have customers coming into your home and shopping from your home? That's insane. So then that got picked up by a lot of press. But like sometimes you're just doing things because you're being scrappy and trying to figure out how do you just continue to evolve and get to the next level as a brand. But again, I guess that's where those relationships came in. So then, you know, finding out about that, then it kind of ended up being the story as the next part of the evolution.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. I mean, there's lots of different trends I've been seeing as I've been having these conversations now for you know, the past few months on these lives. And, you know, it reminds me too of, we interviewed the CEO of Barry's, and he's still to this day, every Saturday, at least once a week, he's teaching classes. Not only when you launch a studio, but just like when it's LA, you can just roll in and take his class. And most of the time, no one knows that he's the CEO of the company. and it's his own version of a lab to the extent of you can see people interacting with the product. I bet you at the time, most people don't know that you're the founders of this business when they're rolling through. You're just, you're here to help me
and
shop.
Unless they were chatting and stayed a while. I mean, but that's what we learned. It was amazing. Like, people really loved the experience. And so we would give them a glass of wine and they would just be on the sofa. And, there would be sometimes it would be like on a Saturday at like 5 o'clock and we're like, we have plans in like an hour, but we can't kick them out. What do we do?
You want to come with some takeout? Like, we'll go on dinner here.
So there were certain things along the way, but yeah, I mean, we were doing the earliest appointments, and it was before we had hired anyone to do it, and we would do it. Different members of our team would do it because it was good feedback as well. But we were getting the feedback live, right? And exactly that. I wasn't, volunteering the information. I wanted to get all of the information as if they didn't know who I was, and not hold back any feedback.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. Well, in the last couple of minutes, there's an interesting question that I think can kind of bridges to the end of, what are you excited about for the future of the business? But if you were to think back about that whole story you've told, Hussein is asking here, if you were to build SNOWE again in 2021, what would you do differently? And so maybe let's take it from both angles. If you had to start from scratch, would there be anything you'd do differently given current environment? And going forward, the business is obviously at scale and growing. What are you excited about and growing with the business today?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think what is a testament to not just what we've built, but what our team has built is, if we were looking at SNOWE and what it was, we wouldn't just, totally scrap it and say, this is where it should be. Like, this is a whole new business. This is what we would have built. I think there are certain things. It's a journey and you need to learn things along the way. And obviously we've made many mistakes and learned a lot of things to get to where we are. There's no question about that. But we still think we're just getting started and just scratching the surface. And there's so many ways in which we are excited to scale SNOWE. It's a little bit of a cop-out in the sense of we wouldn't scrap it, but I think the hard part to answer that kind of gets into, Daniel, what you were saying is, like, the landscape looks so different and the marketing stack looks so different. So like, things that we did to launch and gain early customers and grow and scale would not be ways that we could grow the business nowadays. We were not spending on Facebook, like, at the beginning. Like, we did not want to pay for digital ads when we launched. So like, just that alone is mind-boggling, right? That changed very rapidly, but for us, it was kind of like this black box. And 3 months later, it probably was when it like just totally flipped on its head in that same year. But there were things like that where we couldn't even imagine starting a business without, leveraging that digital marketing stack nowadays. But there were things that I would still say, like, we're used to things that aren't always scalable. Like the example I just gave of, the retail lab in our place, that's not scalable. That's not what we could do, at the retail level and get to 30 stores nationally. But I think it's things that you need to do to learn to be able to set the stage for how you want to grow. So I think those are like important lessons that you then get to build on, even if that fundamentally isn't the thing that you can scale out.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I mean, I know we're at time, so I just love to finish off for you personally. Let's hope, everything opens up again soon and we can go back to somewhat of a normal life. Is there anything you're craving to do next? A restaurant you wish you could go back to immediately in New York or wherever else in the world? What's the the thing you're most excited about in the next, few months personally?
Yeah, I would say that. I would say restaurants and, especially in New York, that's been such a part of the culture. And Daniel and I we were chatting for a couple of minutes, before we got on, and we've been down in Florida since we had a baby, which was last September. So a lot of things have changed since we've been out of New York. So we haven't been out to our favorite restaurants. And we're coming back to New York next month for the first time in a year. So wow. I think we have a lot of spots that we're looking to hit up, and we hear there's an amazing outdoor restaurant scene in New York right now. So
it must be. I would trust no other place than New Yorkers to come up with like the most crazy outdoor concepts.
Totally. So that's definitely something we're looking forward to.
Yeah, the one I'm craving the most, because it's also the hardest thing to do in takeout, is ramen. And my routine every time I visited New York was I would book the probably like 6:30 or 7 p.m. flight out, because that meant I could go to Ippudo, which is by Astor Place Station, and I would get it right at 5, because you don't have to wait in a line if you show up right at 5. So you eat from 5 to 5:30. It's like a quick service, and then we can get onto a cab and take me to LaGuardia or Newark, wherever I was flying out of.
You really had it timed. Yeah, Ippudo wasn't so far from us. That was definitely a great spot. There is one other, I don't know if you've been in the West Village, to Via Carota, which is Italian spot. I think that's our favorite place in New York, I would venture to say. So I think that's going to be on the short list.
Well, when you're back in New York, hopefully I'll be able to fly out soon. I miss going back and forth. I mean, we'll hit it up there to catch up and say hello.
That sounds great. And hopefully you're allowed out soon.
Fingers crossed. Totally. But thank you so much, Rachel. I really appreciate everyone. Thank you for tuning in. I appreciate all the questions and participation. Next week, we have a couple of great conversations. I encourage you to tune in. We have a special one that I'll be announcing later today or probably tomorrow on LinkedIn. So it's a fun one. So hope you guys are excited. But thank you all. Thank you, Rachel, and hope we'll see you guys all soon.
Thanks for having me.